toga parties, emperors. The Roman Empire has this incredible hold on us, doesn't it?
It really does.
This civilization dominated the Mediterranean for centuries, and honestly, their influence is still visible everywhere.
Absolutely. You can't escape it.
Roman history is just massive, a real treasure trove. So for this deep dive, we're trying to zero in on the essentials, the really captivating parts of Rome's journey, its rise, its peak, the Western decline, and maybe a quick look eastward, too.
Sounds good. It's a huge topic, so focusing is key.
Exactly. We've got some great historical accounts with us, sort of our guides. So let's dive into what made Rome, what made it so significant.
Absolutely. And what makes Roman history so compelling isn't just the sheer scale of time and territory, but also how it really laid the groundwork for so much of what came after, especially in the West. You mentioned those foundation myths. It's interesting how they actively, shaped Roman identity right from the very start.
Right. So, picture this. 753 BC, the legendary founding of Rome. We get this amazing story. Twin brothers, Romulus and Remus.
The classic tale.
Not your average kids. Their dad was supposedly Mars, the god of war, and they were abandoned, left as infants, but then supposedly nursed by a she-wolf, a lupa in Latin.
A famous she-wolf.
Now, here's a little twist. Lupa was apparently also slang for, a prostitute.
Ah, yes.
A double meaning.
So was Rome truly nurtured by this divine animal, or is there maybe a more colorful origin story hidden there? It feels like history sometimes has a bit of a cheeky sense of humor,
That duality in the myth is quite telling, actually. The divine parentage obviously served to legitimize Rome, gave it this aura of godly favor.
Sure, makes sense.
But that other meaning of lupa, it adds this layer of complexity. Perhaps it hints at a more grounded, maybe even earthy beginning. It suggests the Romans were okay holding both the grand and the perhaps slightly less respectable in their own story. Yeah, they could handle both. And the brotherly drama just keeps going. They disagreed on where to build their city, apparently, and it ended with Romulus. Well, Remus didn't make it out of that argument.
No, he didn't. A rather brutal start.
And Romulus then names the city after himself. Some people see this as like an early symbol of the political infighting that would pop up again and again in Roman history.
Precisely. It sets a certain tone, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And beyond the she-wolf, there's that other origin story, the one linking Rome back to the Trojan hero Aeneas. That's fascinating, too.
Oh, right. From the Aeneid.
Exactly. This basically gave the Romans this distinguished lineage, stretching all the way back to ancient Troy and, by extension, Greece. It was like retroactively grafting themselves onto this prestigious historical narrative instantly boosted their perceived status.
Talk about building your brand. Okay, so this city with these kind of wild beginnings somehow just explodes into this massive empire. How did that even happen? Was there some grand strategy right from day one?
Well, what's interesting is that the early Roman expansion across Italy, it wasn't necessarily some meticulously planned conquest. Often, it seems, it was more of a reaction, dealing with conflicts with their neighbors.
Okay.
Their strategic location, though, right on the Tiber River, plus those easily defensible hills, that definitely gave them an initial advantage.
So less master plan for world domination and more, okay, we've got to deal with this problem right here. But they were clearly doing something right in how they managed the people they conquered.
Absolutely. And here's where their political thinking really shines, I think. The Romans often offered some form of Roman citizenship to the peoples they conquered.
That seems unusual for the time.
It was. Think about the psychological impact. You've just been defeated. But then you're offered a stake in the winner's success, a chance to share their identity, their privileges. It fostered this sense of inclusion and loyalty that was remarkably effective in, cementing their power. Yeah. Much more integrative than many other empires.
That's incredibly forward-thinking, isn't it? Like expanding the whole pie rather than just taking a bigger slice for yourself.
Exactly.
And their army, that wasn't static either, right? It evolved quite a bit.
Indeed. The Roman military, it transitioned from the older, more rigid Greek phalanx to a much more adaptable system. Legions and maniples, the smaller, more mobile units. This let them be far more effective across different kinds of terrain against different enemy tactics.
Flexibility was key.
Total flexibility.
Yeah.
And underpinning it all was this fierce emphasis on discipline, on training, and on constantly refining their military practices. Yeah. They learned and adapted.
And they weren't just fighters, they were master builders too. I mean, the Appian Way parts of it are still there. That says something.
Absolutely. The construction of the Appian Way, the Via Appia back in 312 BC, that was revolutionary. It was this vital artery for moving troops and supplies really quickly. It helped project Roman power and also facilitated trade. It was their first huge infrastructure project, really, and it set a precedent.
So this republic, it's expanding its reach with this smart political strategy, a super adaptable army. What was daily life actually like back then in Rome? It couldn't have been all just battles and road building.
No. Imagine a really vibrant cosmopolitan hub. You'd have people drawn from all across Europe, Asia, Africa, a real melting pot.
Wow.
Roman society definitely had a structure, though. You had the patricians, the sort of established elite families.
The old money.
Kind of, yeah. And then the plebeians, the common citizens. And there were ongoing power struggles between them, usually about influence and rights.
Sounds familiar. That theme runs through history, but I remember reading something about a free grain supply. That seems surprisingly progressive for back then.
Yes, the cura annonae. What's particularly noteworthy is that the Roman Republic implemented this free grain allowance for its citizens. Now, partly it was to keep social order, prevent unrest by making sure people were fed.
Keep the peace.
Right. But it also represents a really early form of social provision or social welfare.
Interesting. And they also laid the groundwork for a lot of our legal thinking with those early law codes, didn't they?
Yes, definitely. The establishment of a formal legal system, starting with the 12 tables, was a huge development. It was an effort to actually write down the laws, make them public, accessible, applicable to all citizens. That's a massive step towards a more standardized, rule-based society.
Huge step. And for fun. Chariot racing at the Circus Maximus, that sounds like it was the absolute Super Bowl of its day.
That's a great analogy. Chariot racing was immensely popular. A massive public spectacle could draw hundreds of thousands of spectators. It was the entertainment, a place where everyone from senators to slaves could gather.
Incredible scale.
Yeah.
Now, I did come across this rather quirky detail. Emperor Claudius, much later in the empire, but he apparently considered legalizing, passing gas at mealtimes because he thought holding it in was unhealthy. It's just a strange little tidbit, but it kind of offers this glimpse into some unexpected corners of Roman thought.
It does indeed. It reminds us that even within this powerful empire, everyday concerns and maybe some unusual ideas were floating around. And it's a good reminder that history isn't only about the grand narratives of conquest and politics. There's daily life, too.
Absolutely. And there were also specific customs around newborns, right? Like a day of purification, highlighting how important ritual was in daily life.
Yes, rituals marked many stages of life.
And the father had significant authority in the Roman household, the paterfamilias.
That's right. The concept of patri potestas, the father's authority, was really a cornerstone of Roman family structure. It gave him considerable power over his children and the whole household, legally speaking.
Okay, so we've seen Rome rise, become this dominant republic. But that system, it eventually started to crumble, didn't it? What were the first signs, the initial cracks in the foundation?
Well, by the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic was definitely facing significant internal pressures. You had these ambitious generals, ambitious politicians, driven by personal power, military success, and they began to challenge and ultimately really erode the traditional Republican institutions, the old ways of doing things.
Figures like Julius Caesar spring to mind immediately. Crossing the Rubicon River with his army. That was a pretty clear signal that the old rules were being tossed out, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It was a direct defiance of the Senate's authority, a real point of no return. Caesar's actions eventually leading to him being appointed dictator for life. That fundamentally contradicted the whole Republican ideal of temporary power, checks and balances.
And that didn't end too peacefully for him. All those senators with their daggers in 44 BCE. The Ides of March.
Indeed. His assassination just plunged the Republic into even more chaos, more civil war.
Right.
However, this period of intense instability ultimately paved the way for his adopted son, Octavian, who became Augustus.
Right.
And by 27 BCE, Augustus had effectively established the Roman Empire. So the Republic transitioned through a lot of upheaval into an imperial system under one ruler.
And with the empire came the Pax Romana, that legendary era of Roman peace. Sounds like maybe a much-needed breather after all that Republican drama and civil war.
It really was a remarkable period. Relative peace, relative prosperity within the empire's vast borders, lasting for about 200 years, starting with Augustus. Now, There were still conflicts out on the frontiers, sure,
Be something somewhere.
but the core territories experienced this long stretch of stability, and that fostered significant economic growth, cultural flourishing. It was a good time to be, well, Roman for many.
And the empire reached its absolute largest size during this time, right? Under emperors like Trajan.
Exactly. The empire expanded to its maximum geographical extent. And this era also saw huge infrastructure development. Think about the aqueducts, like the Aqua Appia you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
essential for supplying water to these growing cities.
Amazing engineering.
And the vast network of roads, including extending the Appian Way even further,
Yeah.
these roads facilitated trade, communication, military deployment across this immense territory. They literally tied the empire together.
Those aqueducts are just feats of engineering that still blow my mind today. And public baths were a huge part of Roman life during this period too, I gather.
Well, absolutely. Public baths were much more than just places to get clean. They were vital social hubs, places for exercise, for business networking, relaxation, just part of the fabric of Roman culture.
A community center almost.
In a way, yes. And let's not forget the flourishing of arts and literature. Works like Virgil's Aeneid, which really helped solidify a Roman cultural identity separate from the Greeks.
Okay, so this was the Roman Empire really hitting its stride. Peaceful, prosperous, culturally rich, technologically advanced for its time. A true superpower.
Without a doubt.
But as we know, even the mightiest empires can stumble. What were the factors that started the decline, particularly of the Western Roman Empire?
It's complex, of course. The decline was this multifaceted process spanning centuries. But the 3rd century CE is often seen as a critical turning point. It's sometimes called the crisis of the 3rd century.
Right.
This period was just marked by intense political instability, frequent civil wars, a really rapid succession of emperors, dozens in just 50 years or so, constant turmoil at the top.
Sounds like a recipe for chaos. And there were economic problems brewing too, something about them messing with their currency.
Yes, the empire faced significant economic challenges, including serious inflation. One key factor was the debasement of the silver content in their coins, like the main silver coin, the denarius.
So they were putting less silver in?
Exactly, stretching the silver supply, but it effectively reduced the value of the currency, led to rising prices for goods and services.
Yeah.
Basically, money wasn't worth as much.
So the buying power just plummeted, a problem that sounds depressingly familiar even today.
Hmm.
And it wasn't just the economy under strain, was it? Roman society itself was changing in ways that maybe weakened it from within.
Indeed. We see evidence suggesting a decline in civic engagement in some areas, maybe a diminished sense of public responsibility among parts of the population. The gap between the really wealthy elite and the impoverished masses also seems to have widened considerably.
More inequality.
Yes. And furthermore, the reliance on a slave-based economy that had inherent limitations and vulnerabilities, especially when expansion slowed down and the supply of new slaves decreased.
Ah, okay. And then there was the increasing pressure from outside their borders, those groups we often lump together as barbarian tribes.
Yes, the empire faced growing pressure on its frontiers from various groups: Goths, Vandals, Franks, Huns, many others. It's important to remember, though, these weren't always just small raiding parties. Often there were large-scale migrations of entire peoples looking for new lands, sometimes pushed westward themselves by other groups.
So mass movements of people, not just armies invading.
Sometimes, yes, which put immense strain on the borders.
And these weren't just minor border skirmishes eventually. Rome itself was sacked on multiple occasions. That must have been a devastating blow, psychologically as much as physically.
Oh, profoundly so. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 CE, and then later by the Vandals in 455 CE, these were huge symbolic events. Rome, the eternal city, the heart of the empire, being invaded and plundered, it really shook the foundations of Roman power and prestige, sent shockwaves across the empire.
You can imagine. And the Huns, under Attila, they played a big role in pushing other groups around, right? Kind of a catalyst for more chaos.
Exactly. The westward expansion of the Huns in the 4th and 5th centuries created this sort of domino effect. It displaced other groups, pushed them further into Roman territory, which just added to the strain on the empire's already stretched resources and defenses.
It really sounds like the Western Empire was just being squeezed from all sides: internal problems, economic woes, external pressures.
It was a convergence of factors.
And the Roman army itself started incorporating more and more of these non-Roman, these barbarian soldiers into its ranks. That seems, well, a bit risky.
It was perhaps a necessary evil from their perspective, a pragmatic response to manpower shortages.
Hmm.
But ultimately, it was a gamble. This increasing reliance on barbarian mercenaries, often serving under their own commanders, it definitely led to divided loyalties.
Right.
These soldiers often maintained their own tribal affiliations, their own agendas. They didn't always have that deep-seated commitment to Rome itself.
So the army that was meant to defend Rome was becoming less.
Roman.
In a sense, yes.
Yeah.
Which further weakened central control.
So the Western Roman Empire, facing all this internal strife, economic trouble, external pressure, military changes, it finally reached its endpoint. What's the traditional date we usually associate with that?
The traditional date that historians often point to for the fall of the Western Roman Empire is 476 CE.
Yes. This is when Odoacer, who was a Germanic military leader in the Roman army, deposed the last Western Roman emperor. And that emperor was a young man, ironically named Romulus Augustulus, echoing the founder and the first emperor.
Wow, Romulus Augustulus, quite the bookend.
It is. Odoacer didn't claim the title of emperor himself, effectively marking the end of Roman emperors ruling from Italy or the West.
But as we know, that wasn't the complete end of the Roman story, was it? The eastern part kept going.
Absolutely crucial point. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we often call the Byzantine Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, modern Istanbul, it persisted for another 1,000 years.
A whole millennium longer.
Yes. It's vital to remember that while the West fragmented and declined, the East not only survived, but actually flourished for a considerable period. It faced its own challenges, of course, but it endured.
And the Eastern Empire developed its own kind of distinct identity over that 1,000 years, didn't it? It wasn't just a carbon copy of the West.
No, definitely not. It evolved its own unique characteristics. Greek became the dominant language of administration and culture rather than Latin, and it adhered to Orthodox Christianity, which diverged from the Catholic Church centered in Rome.
So different language, different branch of Christianity.
Right. Culturally and religiously distinct from the Latin West over time. And despite facing numerous challenges, wars, plagues, internal disputes, it managed to endure until its eventual fall to the Ottoman Turks in 1453.
1453. So the East played this crucial role in preserving Roman traditions, law, administration, learning and developing its own distinct culture for centuries after the West had collapsed. That's a really significant part of the whole Roman narrative.
Precisely. It served as this vital bridge, safeguarding aspects of Roman law, Greek philosophy, classical literature, things that would later profoundly influence the European Renaissance when they were rediscovered or reintroduced to the West.
Okay, so the Western Empire collapses, the Eastern Empire endures for another 1,000 years. But even with the end of the political entity, the legacy of Rome, both West and East, really is just monumental. It shapes our world in countless ways, even today.
It is truly enduring. I mean, just consider our legal systems. That fundamental principle of innocent until proven guilty, that has deep roots in Roman jurisprudence.
Still a cornerstone of justice in many places.
Absolutely. And the Latin language, okay, it's not widely spoken conversationally, but it's the foundation of all the Romance languages. Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian.
Right.
And it has profoundly shaped the vocabulary of English. So many English words have Latin roots.
It's easy to take for granted just how much of our language connects back to Latin. And architecture, those arches and domes we see everywhere, Roman.
Those are direct descendants of Roman architectural innovations. Their engineering skill, particularly with concrete and the arch, allowed them to create these massive, lasting, and really impactful designs. Think the Colosseum, the Pantheon.
Harmonic structures.
And let's not forget their more practical engineering roads, aqueducts, sanitation systems. They were pioneers in urban planning and public works on a scale not really seen before.
It's astonishing to think about the scale of their engineering achievements so long ago, and even something as fundamental as our calendar has Roman roots, doesn't it?
That's correct. The Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar and later refined into the Gregorian calendar that we use globally today. Its basic structure comes directly from the Romans. Their influence is just deeply embedded in our daily lives, often in ways we don't even consciously recognize.
So there you have it, quite an incredible journey we've traced. From those mythical twins and a possibly misunderstood wolf,
right,
to this vast, powerful empire, its eventual complex decline in the West, and that remarkable 1,000-year continuation in the East. It's a story just brimming with drama, innovation, incredible highs, devastating lows, and a legacy that genuinely continues to shape our world.
It really does.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? When you look back at it all, which aspect of Rome's remarkable, sprawling story holds the most relevance for us today? And maybe, what insights can we actually glean from their rise, their peak, and their eventual fall as we navigate our own complex times? Definitely something to think about.